Let's say you got a neighbor who's in the habit of beating his wife occasionally, or just all the time. Now let's say that you're the sort who gets asked about this by a third party. What if the husband lets you know that not only had you better not stick up for the wife, or he'll get you too, but he tells you on second thought you probably shouldn't stick up for yourself either? You see, this is an abusive relationship, or as you and I call it, white supremacy, but there are some folks who've decided that they're going to stay handcuffed to this suicide bargain no matter what. Last week, the white media was saying that Joe Biden was having a rough week, but then out of left field, they decided that Kamala Harris was going to be the whipping post of the day, and they said that there was outrage. Outrage, I tell you, after Vice President Harris fails to correct smear of Israel. Now, keep in mind, this was a Palestinian-American student at some school or university who had simply said to Kamala Harris that what was happening to the Palestinians was breaking her heart in this ethnic genocide of the people, etc., etc. Kamala Harris simply said, "Your truth should not be suppressed." That's all she said. She wasn't sitting there saying, you know what, you're absolutely right. We need to do something. And we need some boycott, sanctions, and divestment. She didn't say that at all. Simply said, well, your truth should not be suppressed, which was a very fancy way of her saying, well, that's just your opinion, and you're entitled to it. Well, even that small concession to just say you're entitled to your opinion, the powers that be made it clear that was the wrong answer. You're supposed to correct that. That's a smear of Israel, and you're supposed to correct it. Now, you got black folks being murdered in the streets every single day by the white thugs with badges. And you got Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. They don't say a dang thing about it. And the media has never said that any characterization of these black victims has been a smear. And nor have they ever reported that some politician or another fails to correct a smear of Tamir Rice, or a smear of George Floyd, or a smear of Tatiana Jefferson, or any of the black victims of the thugs with badges, these white supremacists roaming the streets. The white media doesn't do that kind of reporting. This is supposed to be an article here. Now, that kind of talk, fails to correct smear of Israel, that's editorial language. That's not the language for an article, but basically that's the whole idea. It's a matter of, well, this is not an editorial. Why? This is just straightforward reporting. The story here is that Kamala Harris failed to correct a smear of Israel. And by the way, that phrase, fails to correct smear of Israel, that was being plastered across all the white media. Not just CNN. There's a number of these white media outlets using that phrase because this is a message that they want out there. They want this to be seen. If somebody says something that is critical of Israel, that's a smear. Doesn't matter what's being said. It's a smear off top automatically. You are only allowed to say good things about Israel. You are not allowed to critique them or criticize them in any shape, form, or fashion. And any politician who does not immediately say, you're wrong, I don't even know what you said, but you're wrong. If you do not do that immediately, why, you have failed to correct a smear, mind you. Meanwhile, you got the facts that are excruciatingly clear about the murders of black people, and that's never a smear. Nothing against a black person is ever a smear. That's the message being sent. In addition to that, Kamala Harris is being put on notice. The white media is just giving her a not-so-friendly reminder. You can have your card pulled at any time. Do not think that just because Joe Biden put you on the ballot as a VP, you can't be removed. Why, you look at all of these black women across the country, a number of very notable, prominent black female mayors who are either saying we're not going to be running again, or they're under heavy fire, like Uncle Fester in Chicago. Lori Lightfoot. Oh, yeah. From D.C. to San Fran, they're putting a lot of them on doggone notice. Mayor Breed out there in San Francisco, they're telling her, just because you think that you've made it to that spot, just because you were given that particular mayor's office, please don't think that it's yours. You don't have the ability to hold it if we do not allow you to. And so it's no surprise that out of nowhere, A story that isn't a story at all. The white media is just using this as a springboard to do something that they've been wanting to do. Just go ahead and give her a slap upside the head just to remind her you got to come in for some abuse too. Oh no, we don't intend for having people who are white supremacy is going to be having all of these surrogates acting for it. At some point, if you're going to be ushering in your American apartheid state for your ruling white minority, well, we don't need so many of these tools. Kamala Harris is being teed up to be broken. But of course, Kamala Harris had nothing to apologize for. The Palestinian American students question, her statement rather, that was not a smear. And even if it was, Kamala Harris is not bound to be the representative of Israel. Israel's got plenty of representatives both in Israel and certainly in the United States. Kamala Harris does not have to act as their PR team or decide that somebody says something critical of Israel, she's got to be putting on the cape. But it's a matter of you make sure that you train people through repetition, so that they understand that should such and such event come to pass, well, you know that there's going to be pressure and heat put on you, so that you train them like dogs what the response is supposed to be. And of course, Kamala Harris was tripping over her shoelaces to make sure, oh, no, I want to make it crystal clear that any characterization of Israel as committing some sort of genocide or what have you, oh, absolutely not. That is definitely wrong. Yeah. She got the message. She knows that she's not in the position that she's in right now because of competence. She's there because the powers that be felt that her presence was going to be useful, but as the black media makes it clear, we're not taking any cues from her. The black folks, the black street is not at all impressed with Kamala Harris. Putting her as vice president did not improve her standing among us. They're looking going, all that for nothing, huh? Well, in that case, then we can go ahead and just smack her around full time. And that's what they're making into the slant of their reporting on Kamala all of a sudden. CNN in particular leading the charge. We want to paint a static portrait of incompetence on Kamala Harris's part. Incompetence on everything. We're just going to play a greatest hits of Kamala Harris screwing things up.
This dust-up is just one in a series for the vice president in her 9 months on the job. In June, her first foreign trip completely overshadowed by her blunt delivery of this message to Guatemalan migrants. That answer upsetting many, including members of her own party, and calling into question her diplomatic chops. Just days later, Harris causing headlines again by dismissing the criticism that she's never been to the border.
There have also been reports about dysfunction and infighting in Harris's office. She's recently brought on 2 more communications aides to help manage all of this. And back on this most recent dust-up, many of the groups we spoke to today who were concerned about her response to that student, they say they are satisfied by the White House's outreach today.
Man, she got on the wrong side of the Israelis. And she apparently doesn't understand that the people who you tell don't come to America are supposed to be black folks. The Latinos are okay, because that's the distinction CNN made. Oh, there was a dust up because of what she said to Guatemalan migrants. Ain't got, as far as the Haitians are concerned, you can tell them anything you want. Tell them you niggers better not come within 100 miles of the U.S. But Guatemalans, if you're talking about non-black migrants, well, that's a problem. Because these are the people who white supremacy would like to see who displace black folks politically, if not in every other way. And then, have you been to the border? Oh, just one embarrassment after the other. This woman just trips over her shoelaces on everything. Why, this woman here, people within her own party are questioning her diplomatic chops. Yeah, just anonymous folks. You don't see anyone actually saying anything, but the white media is saying it, so it must be true. But the most salient point by CNN is talking about that there's dysfunction and infighting in Kamala Harris's office. Now, this is important because I've been telling y'all at least since September 2017, one of the big points that was being made about Kamala Harris's leadership or lack thereof of the San Francisco DA's office and the California Attorney General's office is that these offices were dysfunctional under her stewardship. Dysfunctional to say the least. You got lab techs running off with the doggone cocaine and snorting it. You got the cops writing up any kind of reports that they want. You got her trying to keep innocent people in jail. Yeah, I'd say that's a little bit dysfunctional. But they're saying this about her office, and she ain't even got no dang official responsibilities other than to break the tie in the Senate occasionally. And here they are saying that there's dysfunction and infighting going on. And notice how they're separating this from Joe Biden. They're not mentioning Biden at all. I mean, if there's dysfunction and infighting going on in Kamala Harris's office, doesn't that mean that there's dysfunction and infighting going on in Joe Biden's administration? Except CNN's drawn a distinction as if this is a separate entity from Joe Biden. Notice the slant? They're talking about her as if, well, whatever's going on with Kamala Harris, that ain't got nothing to do with Joe Biden. That doesn't reflect poorly on him. Doesn't reflect poorly on his choice of VP. Doesn't reflect poorly on how he runs his administration. After all, the leader sets the tone for his men, right? Now, as far as they're concerned, this is Kamala Harris's problem. This is her issue. This is the fact that she can't get anything right. And they know what they're doing. This dovetails off of the same reporting that was being done on Kamala Harris in her days in California. They're just making it clear to her that when it's time to get her out of there, there's going to be this orgy of reporting talking about, oh man, just nothing but dysfunction and infighting. And this is how it's always been under Kamala Harris. Why? You can go all the way back to her California days. When it comes time for them to throw her under the bus, you'll be hearing all of this brought up again, and they'll be saying this to you and acting like it's the first time that anyone's ever mentioned it. But infighting and dysfunction, and Kamala Harris is bringing in 2 new communications staff members. Well, when you look at who it is that she's got, they already got a clown car of individuals who are supposed to be her communications staff. And that being the case, well, if she's making additions to the staff, what that means is the people who are there, the women who are there, ain't getting it done. And who is it exactly that Kamala Harris has as her communication, or should I say miscommunication staff? Well, for starters, you have a Haitian immigrant, Ashley Etienne, who's the communications director for the vice president. And you got Simone Mammy Sanders, who's senior advisor and chief spokesperson for the vice president, but didn't have any quotes from her on this story. Though one simply has to wonder if perhaps some of the talk about infighting and such and dysfunction, one has to wonder if maybe it's Simone Sanders. Maybe she didn't get enough airtime. She ain't gotten any, to be totally honest. Maybe this is a matter of her grumbling to whatever pals in the white media that she used to do panels with. I mean, it's even money. But these 2 advise Kamala Harris on what to say, and, well, there's only 2 of them, and yet, as our CNN reporterette said, Kamala Harris is planning to bring in 2 additional members. But is it 2 additional members, or is it 2 replacement members? And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention our old pal Karine Stud-Pierre, who happens to be the principal deputy press secretary, whatever that means. I think it means that she carries Jen Psaki's purse around for her. You got 3 black women who are supposed to be the communications staff for this White House, and yet you ain't heard hide nor hair of them on this. In fact, you haven't heard them on Haiti either, have you? But you got 2 Haitians working as the communications folk in the White House, and yet neither one of them has said anything critical about the treatment of their fellow family members down on the border. Neither one of them had a dang thing to say. Neither one of them has had the stones to resign and protest. None of them's done anything. Nothing at all. But if Kamala Harris is going to be making some addition or changes or otherwise doing something with her communications staff, well, the question becomes, is Ashley Etienne going to be getting her walking papers? How about Simone Sanders, the chief spokesperson and senior advisor for Kamala Harris? All of that advice that she's given, apparently, some of the advice ought to be, well, Kamala, you should just shut up. Don't say anything. The less you talk, the better off you'll be. So, I think we're going to be having ourselves a little fight between fellow immigrants. Who do you think's going to get thrown overboard? My money is on Karine Stud-Pierre. Her skin's darker than Ashley Etienne, and besides, Karine Pierre, she hasn't been able to corral the black folks, and the black media keeps pointing her out, so she's more of a liability than anything else. My money would be on her suddenly discovering that she wants to go pursue other opportunities outside the White House. It's hard to say. Somebody's probably going to wind up losing their job, so Kamala Harris can say that the powers that be that spanked her last week have extracted their pound of flesh. But that's totally to be expected. After all, there's no honor among thieves. Jason Black routinely mentions that white supremacy demands blood sacrifices. And that's not only for the white supremacist foot soldiers, but also for the bootlicks themselves. Before Simone Mammy Sanders could get her job in the White House basement, she first had to prove that she'd defend Biden's black mass incarceration bill, the 94 crime bill, aka Biden's law. Tens of thousands of black people locked up, many executed because Biden used the national treasury to fund the prison industrial complex and to bribe the states so as to bring their laws in line with what he had at the federal level. That way, he was able to carpet bomb the country with this anti-black punitive war that he was waging. Simone Sanders had to prove that her willingness to protect white supremacy was more important to her than black people, and that's exactly what she did. So it shouldn't surprise anyone at all that the roly-polies and the Corrine Stud-Pierres and the Ashley Etiennes aren't saying anything about this. No, of course not. They understand who it is that they can criticize, black folks, and who they can't, anyone but black folks. They wouldn't stand up for their fellow Haitians. They don't even stand up for one another. This is how the bootlicks make their bones for white supremacy. You have to sacrifice some of your own to prove that you want to curry favor from the dominant society, and that's the most important thing to you. It's more important to you than anything else. And what are they doing it for? Not to get filthy stinking rich. They're not doing it for any power. Ask Simone Sanders how powerful she is. They're doing this merely to get gainful employment. Just to get a job. And not some big money job either. This is just to get a resume enhancer. They are willing to throw black folks under the bus. They're willing to throw their own kith and kin under the bus. Sacrifice them wholesale, sit on their hands and say nothing while black folks are being systematically mass brutalized. And do that just to get a job and just to keep it. That tells you how pathetic the bootlicks are. Their real job is self-hate. But anyway, back to Kamala Harris and the drubbing she was taking last week. Where the world of the Ski-Wee Collective right now to stick up for her and make it clear, you're not going to be slapping her around simply because of something you think she should have done. If the Israelis have a problem with what some Palestinian students saying, let them speak for themselves. God knows they've got enough spokespeople and they've got enough special interest and PR folks. God knows they got enough. Where's Shea Butter Twitter at to stick up for Kamala Harris? Where were the Swirlerati at? The clowns who were pushing Kamala to us last year, they aren't even here to stick up for her. Because these wannabe bougie Negroes they're all hoping that they're going to get an in with the exact same white power structure that selected Kamala to be VP. They don't have a plan B. Licking the boots and kissing the behinds of the white supremacists, that's the only skill they've got. To the extent you call that skill, it doesn't take any brain power. Though it does take effort, a lot of effort. And it also takes a strong streak of self-hate. You got to be a real sadomasochist. You got to have a real masochistic streak in you to do what these clowns do. Bootlicks don't stick up for each other because they don't care about anyone other than themselves. But considering that all the bootlicks get sent to the glue factory sooner or later, and these days it's sooner, these clowns know how this little game's going to end. And they will still waste their lives and break their necks and other black folks if they can manage it to play the game, so they don't even care about themselves. Well, we don't follow the lead of these suicidal lemmings. That's how it works. See, whenever you got some white person who's prominent and this person has had a scandal of some sort that's dragging them down, well, the white media looks and goes, well, we're not about to let this just be about them. We got to find a black person who we can make prominent. We got to have some balance, and the balance is we're going to have a black person who we have all sorts of unsavory headlines about, even if we have to manufacture them. Oh no, if there's a white person who's basically the biggest scandal in the world, we got to find some black person. If this black person was accused of dropping a banana peel somewhere, we're going to go ahead and make them out to be the trial of the century. We're going to pretend as if that's the biggest thing in the world. When Joe Biden was vice president, you can't think of even one time when somebody would say, oh, Barack Obama, he had a rough week, and Joe Biden made it even worse. Now, the white media makes it a point. We're not trying to say anything. And Joe Biden, the walking gaffe machine, this clown, he was spouting all sorts of stupidity left, right, and center. But the white media, they did not decide to plaster it all over the place. Don't want to set that precedent. Oh, no. If Barack Obama's having a bad week, that's just him. The headline's going to be about him and his inability to get anything done. But I think that this is all going to be a recurring theme, especially as we get closer and closer to 2024. Kamala Harris is going to be finding that whatever media allies she thought she had probably ain't so cozy with her. If someone's going to be thrown under the bus, it ain't going to be Jim Crow Joe. It's most likely to be her. There is a pivoting that's taking place by the so-called leftist media, which ain't leftist at all. Neely Fuller said the white supremacy believes in taking both sides of the issue. And the best example that I can think of that was the recent story about OAN, One America News, the white supremacist propaganda mill. Most of their so-called anchors and reporters, these guys spout all sorts of anti-black garbage, making excuses for the killing of black people. Oh, it ain't as bad as all that. Smears about the black victims of white supremacist violence. These guys, they do everything that they can to take the kind of bilge and garbage that's usually posted in internet message boards. And as far as they're concerned, that's going to be our lead story. But it's come out with the lawsuit against OAN. They were asked about their origins. How did you guys even get started in the first place? And it was the founder and CEO of OAN who admitted that they were actually, his little network wasn't his brainchild at all. It was actually the brainchild of AT&T. Yeah, the same AT&T that owns CNN. Now, according to the founder and CEO of One America News, he said that what happened was back in 2013, you had some AT&T executives who said that they wanted a conservative network. AT&T was in broadcasting at this point because they had bought Time Warner and all that. They had merged with Time Warner. And they wanted to have conservative networks added to their little broadcasting stable. So far, up until that point, they only had one, Fox News. And that was the reason why Robert Herring, who was the founder and CEO of One America News, that was the reason why he started it. He started it because AT&T made it clear, if somebody builds it, we'll go ahead and give you some money. And if this sounds just like Roger Ailes with Fox News, you're damn right. This is how white supremacy operates. The bad guys believe in putting their money behind what they believe in. It was a matter of these guys made it clear we're willing to write a check. And because of the fact that they own the communications infrastructure, they had the ability to arbitrarily turn OAN into an overnight sensation. They could put OAN into tens of millions of homes through their satellite service, DirecTV. And as a result, OAN went from being a nothing that nobody had heard of overnight. They were getting tens of millions of dollars in revenue simply because AT&T made it clear, we're going to put you guys on. You won't have to do anything. We're going to make it where everyone's going to know about you because we're going to provide the infrastructure for you to be seen. All you got to do is put on your little propaganda show. We'll make sure that people see it. And just to give you an idea of just how dependent OAN is, the fact that this is clearly just a sock puppet organization for what AT&T wants out there. One of the accountants for OAN testified that he was offered $250 million for OAN in 2019. The accountant said that without the DirecTV deal, the network's value would be zero. This is the accountant saying this under oath. And the reason for that, of course, is that something on the order of about 90% of OAN's revenue is the direct result of their deal with AT&T's various platforms. 90% of their revenue comes from AT&T. They're an invention of AT&T, and without them, they would be worth nothing. He didn't say they'd be worth significantly less. He didn't say they would be worth very little. He said the company's value would be zero. The lawyer for OAN, guy named Patrick Nellies, he said if Herring Networks, for instance, was to lose or not be renewed by DirecTV, the company would go out of business tomorrow. OAN is so completely and thoroughly dependent upon AT&T that if AT&T decides, well, heck, we're not going to do anything with you on DirecTV, those guys would just have to shutter the doors. They'd be done. They would be out of business the very next day. So the only reason that these guys exist is because AT&T want them to exist. And the only reason that these guys have the reach they've got is because AT&T gave it to them. They didn't have the ability to get it on their own. And as their own lawyer pointed out, they damn sure don't have the ability to keep it. This is what Jason Black talks about when he says white supremacy tries to pick winners and losers. They try to decide who the winners are going to be. The only reason you know who Issa Rae is because the good white folks over at HBO, they decided you should know who she is. And just like with OAN, if the day should ever come that they decide, all right, we're done with you, Issa Rae would shrivel up and blow away the very next day. She'd be gone the very next day, never to be seen nor heard from again. This is not a matter of merit. White supremacy is about guaranteed outcomes. It is about making sure that they get a predetermined result, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of your effort. It's not about you working for it. It's about it being handed to you. That's what Abraham Lincoln meant when he said that he didn't believe in the equality of the races, specifically black and white. He said, I believe that the superior position should be assigned to the white man. Assigned means given to you. It's handed to you. White supremacy makes it very clear they're not choosing the cream that rises to the top. They're just picking and choosing who is operating in their interests. OAN was an invention of AT&T. Nobody came to them and said, hey, we got an idea for One American News. Like, God dang it, we need another right-wing blowtorch propaganda mill. They made it clear that if somebody brought it to them, that they were in the market for this. This is what they wanted. So, of course, somebody was going to bring it to them. And then they made sure that this entity would have the financial underpinning that they needed. You're going to be seen in millions and millions of homes. We know you will because we've got the satellites set up to make sure you'll be seen. And this flood of money comes to these guys. A flood of money comes to them simply because the white media selected them. Now, considering that AT&T owns both CNN and the most vociferous of the right-wing outlets, OAN, that tells you everything you need to know. When Neely Fuller says white supremacy believes in taking both sides of the argument, that's exactly what he meant. Because no matter if it's CNN or OAN, neither one of them is going to be saying anything about the anti-black propaganda and the anti-black garbage being pumped out by Warner Media or AT&T. Nobody's going to be sitting there saying, well, gee, all of these derogatory images and stories about black people, no one's going to be questioning that. And you will be sitting here so distracted by whether or not Jim Acosta or whether or not whatever Klansman pretending to be an anchor person at OAN it is, no matter who it is on either CNN or OAN, you're going to be so busy watching these guys pretending to have spitball fights with each other. Nobody's going to be asking about the anti-black media that's coming out of AT&T. That's never going to be the lead story. They set you up with a nice little distraction, and you're going to be believing that you're getting two separate opinions when all you got is just two sock puppets being controlled by the exact same puppet master. And their purpose is to distract you. That's the reason why it matters where you get your news and views from. I mean, for God's sake, people have been talking about how it's basically like pro wrestling what we see for political discourse in this country. Yeah. I mean, this is what it is. These are the people who are going to be telling you that you're getting the truth from us. You're getting a unique point of view. No, you're not. You're getting corporate propaganda put forward for the sake of promoting white supremacy. The entire purpose of a media, any media, is to promote a value system. But what value system is it going to be? Is it going to be one that empowers you, or is it going to be one that destroys you? Well, the white media has made it very clear exactly what kind of value system they're promoting. This is what the bad guys have. Now, black media, on the other hand, what we have is you. And that means something. You see, individual effort actually adds up when you aggregate a sufficient number of individuals. The source of the black media's power and its audience are one and the same. What we do, what we are, we're not an invention of some white-moneyed interests. That's what I was pointing out to you about that phony outrage about Dave Chappelle. GLAAD knew that they couldn't get out there and lead the charge themselves to try to take a black man down. So what they did was they have some know-nothing group that you never heard of, the so-called National Black Justice Coalition. As I pointed out to you, you look at them on Twitter, you look at their so-called website, very first thing you see is an LGBT advocacy group. Ain't saying a damn thing about black people. Nothing about reparations, nothing about punishing the police, nothing. It's just LGBT, period. But they're calling themselves the National Black Justice Coalition. And you know, it's usually one or two clowns who are nothing more than front people for their white moneyed interests. The same thing with Black Pac, She the People. You got white shadow money, dark money. I ought to call it pale money because that's what it is. But you got pale money working behind the scenes. They find some flunky, some black flunky that they can use and say, you're going to say that you're the head of this organization and that, well, you have autonomy and you don't take orders from anyone. Please. If you got one person who's dependent, completely and thoroughly dependent for every crumb of their daily bread from this 2 or 3 white people, that's who they take orders from. Because they're not able to get the money on their own. They don't generate nothing on their own. They got their paymasters, and it's exactly what it looks like. Well, the same thing goes for this National Black Justice Coalition and these other sock puppet organizations. It's always 1 or 2 Negroes who you never heard of, who may or may not be immigrants. And these 1 or 2 people, they try to make it seem like they're the head of some organization, some group. Oh, we've got millions behind us. I pointed out for you how it was the griot, Byron Allen's little sewer, who was running around talking about black leaders of the 21st century, young black leaders of the 21st. Man, a bunch of clowns that you don't even know and who you haven't heard of them since. They were mentioned. That's the white media trying to invent their own phony grassroots people. And we're going to say that these guys are black leaders. Is that true? Well, it's true that the white media said it. Har, har, har. That's the game that they play. The white media understands full well that they're spinning nothing but lies out of whole cloth. But what they don't know is whether or not you have been fooled by it. But by the fact that you have more and more black people who are hearing messages like this and they are drawing closer to the black media, they're getting on board. What's happening is the white media is finding out, nah, the game's running a little bit thin for you. I was among the first people to lead the charge and point out that Jacqueline Moore, who was smearing and libeling Dave Chappelle, this individual is white and yet they're the showrunner for a show that's supposed to be about black folks. A show that was created by a black man, and you went and you got yourself a white showrunner for it. And this is the person who's going to be talking about a lack of representation? Get the hell out of here. Kamala Harris may be ready to run for the hills, and she does. She'll bow and scrape at even the slightest hint of displeasure from her white paymasters, but over here in the B1, we don't play that. Over here, we take a hard-nosed approach to our power. And that approach is uncompromising because we've been doing too much damn compromising as is. Black folks are always the first ones to try to sugarcoat the abuse and attacks against us and try to tell ourselves lies and pretend like it's something that it ain't. Hell, I was telling you guys just yesterday about this black man, Clifford Owensby. This dude, he's made national headlines because the police dragged him out of his car by his dreads, by the way, slammed him on the ground. And this black man, he happens to be a paraplegic. What that means is he's crippled from the legs down. His legs are crippled. And he was telling these thugs with badges this. telling them can't get out of the car. I happen to be paraplegic. And the cops tell him, "You gonna get out of this car. You don't get a car, nigger." And he's telling them, "You need to call your white shirt down here." That means supervisor. And he's like, "You need to call your supervisor." They're like, "Well, we ain't calling nobody. We're going to get you out of this car." Now, what did Mr. Owensby say after this vicious assault upon him? Which, by the way, there's absolutely the cops, they're sitting here terrified to even speak about it. Well, what does Mr. Owensby say? He said, when talking to a local radio station, "I feel like they need to be training the officers to deal with disabled people in a more efficient manner. Treat them with respect." He actually said that. Now, of course, the obvious takeaway from that is that you got somebody here who clearly is thinking of trying to cast himself in the light of something other than a black person. He ain't said a word about race in all of this. The word black has not come up in his speech at all. He feels that this is just an issue of the police apparently not being courteous enough to the disabled. And while I'm sure that Mr. Owensby is most likely attempting to set himself up for hopefully some sort of settlement with the city, I can hear Benjamin Crump or Sleaze Merritt having this man on speed dial already, practically before the guy was even slammed on the ground. I'm sure Benjamin Crump was like, "Oh, somewhere I hear some guy who ain't gonna stand up for himself, and I'm sure that there could be some sort of quickie lawsuit payout for me." I'm sure. But this is the kind of absolute lack of character that we cannot have. We cannot have this. A lot of you wonder why it is that I and others, the thought leaders of the black media, why it is that you don't hear us putting on the cape and speaking out whenever you have the latest attack upon a black person. We made it clear years ago. All of this we're going to be representing for so-and-so, and this person can't even say that what happened to them was racial. If they're not going to say it, we're not going to say it either. Because what's been happening is a lot of these fools, they've been trying to win some sort of lawsuit lottery. As far as they're concerned, they are going to do whatever they hope is going to get them a check from the city. The most expedient route to get themselves a check. So no, we are not going to be playing some game where we are lending our voice to it simply because we all know that what happened was racial. But it does us very little good to be highlighting this stuff. And then we got the families who the white media will put in front of the camera. And the family's going to be saying, "Forgive, forgive." And the family's going to be saying, "I think it's a training issue. I don't really think it was racial at all now. It's a training issue. They needs to do's betters." Does us no good for us to lend our voices to that. And as we've been pointing out, a lot of these fools who want to be playing this game, that little charade is going to be coming to an end. These white supremacists are going to be turning off the spigot on that one. Your little old payouts are going to get smaller and smaller if they don't just stop doing it altogether. So for those of you who wonder, and I just feel like occasionally it needs to be you need to be reminded, yes, we know about these things. We know about a number of other incidents that don't necessarily get splashed across social media and the headlines. But why don't we say anything about it? It's because of the fact that this mess keeps happening. I'm afraid that these people are going to have to, rules are in place now. They have one of two options. They can either reach out to the black media, which makes it very clear that they're not going to be playing some game of, I'm going to say it's some other than racism. They can either do that. That's the most expedient route if they're actually for real, so that we can talk to them personally and vet them for ourselves. Or if they decide they're going to go it alone, fine, but in which case we're going to have to take some time just to make sure they don't break bad. They're going to have to prove where they stand. Now, while we could occasionally mention these things simply in passing just so that black folks understand Joe Biden ain't doing a damn thing about it. Whatever happened to that police accountability commission? This would be a perfect case for them. Oh, that's right. Biden said he ain't got time for it. He said Congress should handle that. And Nancy Pelosi promptly said we ain't got time for it either. I would love to ask Mr. Owensby, who did he vote for in 2020? So from the vice president to the disabled in Dayton, Ohio, white supremacy is putting its boots to these black folks and seeing whether or not they'll knuckle under and Seems that there's a lot of them. There's no lack of black folks who are just only too happy to bow and scrape. But we're going to be keeping our eye on Kamala Harris, and we'll also be keeping our eye on Simone Mamie Sanders and Ashley Etienne. And we'll be seeing if these three black women, or if any one of them, happens to have a sudden change of occupation very soon, if white supremacy decides that one of them needs to be kicked out in the cold, make an example out of them. That'll be very interesting to watch. Because whether it's one of them, two of them, or all three of them, the lesson that black folks should take away from it is, no matter how much white supremacists behind you kiss, no matter how many lies you tell on their behalf, no matter how many other black people you throw under the bus, no matter how much of their abuse you take with a smile, being a bootlick is a career path that doesn't come with a retirement plan.